When I started out, I had just gone through college and was, as all of you have heard before, pretty disappointed with my experience there. I recognized that college was a corporate training ground and that I wasn't corporate material. I recognized that corporations that I was being prepared to work for in college were the same people who had brought us the Vietnam War, which I was appalled by, and encouraged and supported the institutional racism that is one of the pillars upon which our beautiful country is built. And I found that appalling. And so I decided I had to do something different with my life. And there was also embedded in that another recognition, which was any job that I could possibly get from the unbelievably boring curriculum that I was pursuing at the university was going to be unbelievably boring. And I just could not envision myself living a life of boredom. Because, growing up in a little tiny town in the middle of a cornfield in Indiana, one of the things you are forced to confront early in your life is boring. And one of the things that, the opportunities that we have in growing up in such places is to sort of decide if that's how we want to live our lives. And if we don't, if that doesn't resonate in the core of your being someplace, then what you learn is if you want to have a life that is alive, you got to make it yourself, because there isn't anybody who's going to hand it to you. Right? Okay? So, here I am, I'm 20 and a half, and I'm sitting in a bar one night. I know I shouldn't have been, but I was. Meaning, not that I have a moral thing about bars, it is that I wasn't quite 21 yet. I'm sitting in this bar, and I look around. Honestly, I remember the noise of the jukebox and the people talking and the glasses and the bottles clinking. I remember that. And I remember the door opening and closing, and I remember this was back in the day when I remember the smell of cigarette smoke and of beer, and you could see the haze of cigarette smoke in the place. And I remember, the smell of the pheromones in the place as well. And it dawned on me at that moment in that bar while I was waiting for my friends to show up, that everything that had ever happened, ever could possibly happen for me in a bar had already happened. And I realized once again that I was walking on the line, about to walk over the line into boredom and stay there forever. And I got up out of that bar and I walked out and I never went back. And I haven't been in a bar since. I got nothing against bars. And, you know, beer's okay too. It's not my drink of choice, but whatever. And coming away from that, for a while I was pretty depressed. I had no clue what I was going to do. But what I did was I just said, okay, I'm going back to basics. And I grew up a fundamentalist Catholic. And that didn't mean that I went back to Catholicism, because I had already worked that out for myself. You know, I was fundamentally committed, like my parents till they died, to the Catholic Church, until I realized that it was part of the institutional structure that sustained corporations and everything they sustain, and I said no to that. But I still love Jesus. And I worked that through as well, and came to the understanding that what I really loved was love. And that love that I loved was in my heart, and if I wanted to find more of it, I'm not going to find it chasing girls. I'm not going to find it drinking beer. I'm not going to find it partying. I'm going to find it in my own heart. And, you know, that love in my own heart is the essence of everything that could ever possibly be wonderful about my own life, and that's what I had to grow. And about that time, a little before that actually, I had some friends who dragged me to a yoga class, which wasn't so easy for me, you know, because I was comfortable in my angry guy, Bob. I was angry. I was angry at the university. I was angry at America. I was angry at corporations. I was just pissed off. And going to yoga and like relaxing was like, I thought, what? How can I relax at a time like this? But I was driving everybody around me crazy, and I was driving myself crazy too, so I went. And I was reluctant to admit it at the time, but it actually felt pretty good to move like that. So I went back and felt good again. So I kept going back. And yes, I admit, that was a strategy. Actually, what I really discovered was that was a strategy for dealing with all of my neuroses. But it was a completely harmless and positive strategy, which, you know, could only, I thought, carried to the nth degree, have a positive impact. Whereas, like, you know, drinking an infinite amount of beer would just, you know, make me fat and an alcoholic. So I continued. And as I continued, I found that good feeling that I experienced in yoga allowed me to more completely get in contact with and stay in contact with the love that I had in my heart, which I knew was the best part of me and the most important part of being alive. So I kept doing it. And this led to, you know, my just sort of naturally, automatically getting into meditation. I used to take a little time at the end of my yoga practice, which, you know, a couple of years into it, I was doing 6 or 7 hours a day. 4 hours for sure every morning and 2 or 3 hours most evenings. And my meditation experiences got longer, and they got deeper, and they also became very much more beautiful. I was, in those moments, for the first time ever in my life, ever, I was happy. I wasn't pissed off about anything. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't, anything. I was just happy. How amazing. And then, about that time, also I started having some really strong experiences outside my meditation practice that caused me, like I started going into trances, and I started, I'd be walking down the street and take a really deep breath and pass out, wake up laying on the sidewalk. And, once I sort of said a little prayer before I ate breakfast on a park bench and woke up, opened my eyes 12 hours later, thought I'd just finished. So I realized that something was happening for me that was bigger than I had anticipated, and that I was likely over my head. I felt like I really needed a teacher to help me understand this and structure it more deeply and completely. And so I started, where are you going to find a teacher in the middle of southern Indiana? Nowhere. That's a few years away. But I started praying for a teacher. And strangely, within, couldn't have been 2 months, 6 weeks, 2 months, some guy shows up at my doorstep with a picture of Rudy and says, "You need to meet this guy." And I say, "You're right." And I, small town, rebellious person from the middle of nowhere, head off to New York City. The cab driver who took me from the airport, only my second flight ever, to Rudy's store cheated the crap out of me. But it's New York. I decided I wasn't going to fight with him about it. I suspected I was being cheated, but I decided, just get that over with. I'm on a mission here. I walked in and looked at Rudy, and my heart shattered. And I felt my heart shatter. And there was an upsurge of tears and energy that was almost knocked me down on the ground, and joy that just completely blew me away. And I knew in that moment that I was standing in exactly the place that I needed to be in. And this was exactly what I needed to do to continue the process of unfolding the love within me that was the most important part of my existence. And I did. There were a lot of huge lessons in there, huge. Just one very glaring, obvious lesson was, coming from a small town in Indiana and a fundamentalist Catholic family, it never dawned on me that men have sex together. Never dawned on me. It just never. So here I am in the East Village in New York in 1970 71, early, when everybody's coming out of the closet. Well, this was New York where there was one giant closet. And everybody was in it doing everybody else. It never dawned on me. I mean, there were so many dimensions of experience around Rudy that, I mean, one night he took me to dinner over in Hoboken, New Jersey. And we walk into a place that looks like a warehouse, and inside there is all this velvet and gold wallpaper that must have been thick, like standing up more than 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch maybe. And there were 12, this is a giant room, bigger than this room, and there are 12 chandeliers that had to be 10 feet across. And the place was packed, even though it looked like a vacant, rundown neighborhood, the entirety of Hoboken, and all the waiters wore short coats with a giant bulge under their arm. They served spaghetti. We had dinner with somebody who I suspect, I didn't know, and it wasn't introduced this way, but I suspect he was a very senior person in the Gambino family. And I think that was because, why would Rudy do that? Well, I think, Rudy was in the art business. The Gambinos controlled the docks. I think it was about, something to do with Rudy shipments. So many things, I really wasn't prepared for any of it, but then, ready or not. Through it all, the understanding that growing love in every circumstance, in every scene, in every situation in our lives became the fundamental, most important endeavor that I could engage in. And I really focused on that. I focused on it when I was sweeping floors. I focused on it when I was helping a non-English speaking Puerto Rican plumber, on Sundays, who used to crawl around the sub-basement of Rudy building below Canal Street. And, I'd chase off the rats for him and bring him his coffee and shine the light on the pipes. Whatever it was, I only thought about growing love. And the focus of that growing love, well, first of all, remember, Rudy had studied in India. And in India, Rudy had a guru, Nityananda, and he studied further with a disciple of Nityananda's after Nityananda died, named Muktananda. And the practice that they taught was called Siddha Yoga, and that Siddha Yoga is a contemporary form of Tantric or Shakta Shaivism. And the basic practice of Shakta Shaivism is about the breath, the way in which the breath distributes in the body, which causes us to discover that that underlying our physical existence, our physical body, there's an energetic form, and that energetic form is comprised of energy channels, of lines of magnetism that interact with each other and form what are called chakras. And, the 3 primary chakras in the body are related to our genitals, our heart, and our brain. I know that everybody in the room has experienced their genitals. Most everybody in the room has experienced their heart, at least for a little bit. I can't speak to the rest of it. Having the experience, these experiences, these powerful experiences, and then beginning to refer to those powerful experiences day by day by day by day, really unleashes, on a very human, personal level, it unleashes within us a whole energy which suddenly allows us to discover that we have talents and capacities that we had no idea about before. We find in the flowing, the movement of our own breath, and it's flowing within us and between us, we find we find deeper connections, we find deeper exchange, we experience inspiration, and most importantly, we begin to see that love within ourselves, that we have extremely valued, is extremely powerful, and from within us can change us and the whole experience of our life. It has the capacity to unlock beauty in us and beauty in our experiences, and it saves us from hell, which is not, fire and brimstone, and it's boredom. Rudy, after I was there for 2 years, passed away. He was telling me he was going to do it for 6 months in advance of that, and I just couldn't believe that that was really true. I was so in denial of everything he said, I thought he was trying to trick me. But he did. And suddenly, after 2 years, I'm sitting there, much more connected to my heart and the other energy centers in my body, much more connected to and grounded in the practices that were intended to awaken more deeply that energy and remove from that energy field all of the tensions and the obstacles that are present in it, all the emotional obstacles, all the mental obstacles, in fact, every negativity, every doubt. I was in touch with that process, but after only 2 years, did I know what I was doing? Absolutely not. I had no idea what I was doing. And suddenly, Rudy's gone, and on the way out, he told a big bunch of his students that if anything happened to him, they should look to me for guidance. Me? I'll continue this story later, but my point is this. Shaivism, Shakta Shaivism, this whole completely different worldview that is the articulation of the endpoint of a growing human being. A human being who is growing love comes to an endpoint which is perfectly described in Shakta Shaivism, and it's perfectly described in Shakta Shaivism because the people who wrote who developed this practice, the people who wrote the literature that supports it, all these people, were totally, totally dedicated to that process. And it wasn't just me or a few people who were doing it in New York together. This went on, it was a revelation to discover, has gone on for thousands of years. For thousands of years, people have been cultivating within themselves their own deepest, most beautiful place, and discovering in that profoundly deep and beautiful place a transformative power which is, well, literally and figuratively mind-blowing. So I'm going to close this story by just giving you one very definitive piece of advice. And that is, in whatever way it is you choose to, and in saying that I mean you don't have to do it here, there are other places it's possible, maybe. In whatever way you choose to, stay connected every day to your heart. Give up the story. Give up the story. Don't just give it up. Abandon it. Run away from it. Give up the story. Give up your story. Because it's bullshit. And get ever more deeply connected to your heart, which is the truth about you. Not the story is not the truth about you. The truth about you is in your heart. Grow that, and grow it, and grow it, and grow it, and grow it, and grow it. And of course, you know, as soon as you start doing that, your story is going to reach out and grab you by the throat and try to choke you. You know, constantly, it will start coming after you, and, you know, as soon as you try to leave it, you will discover it doesn't want to leave you. And you will have to, like, come back to basics, to opening your heart and finding the love in yourself and letting go of the story and choosing to be happy, choosing the good feeling that is available to you, and growing that good feeling and allowing the love in your heart, which can only exist in an environment of good feeling, to come out ever more increasingly and bless you and bless you and bless you so profoundly that your mind will be blown. That's my advice. Good night, everybody. Namaste.